clarify that I'm actually streaming. There we go, good, right. This is going to be a little bit weird because I don't have my rabble of players around me to make me feel less awkward, and I'm also not nearly as drunk as I usually am. But one thing I've been looking to do for a while now is a full recap of everything that went down in Bela'Dun, this continent, in the old campaign that I ran with my girlfriend and a couple of friends from different places, and then go through the sessions that have not been streamed here. Just need to turn down the music because apparently it gets louder and didn't tell me that. That'll do. Okay, so starting with the lore from the old game, or even before the old game, the idea of this continent is that much like many places, this planet included, a war was generally ongoing. Most of the major places didn't really get along with each other for different reasons. And it wasn't so much a race war because all of the races were kind of integrated a little bit, but it certainly stemmed from a predominantly human faction in the south, in a capital called Stalvin, which, if this pings, is here. Yep. Versus a predominantly dwarven mass of people in the north, at the capital rather, called Dunbarlin, which is here. So the purpose of this war was essentially to gain ground, to take control of places that didn't really belong to them. As a result of this, there's a number of other locations throughout Bela'Dun that are tied to Stalvin, and when they get there, because none of my players in the campaigns I've run so far have particularly been to the north, but tied to Dunbarlin as well. Moving on to kind of the end of that war, essentially what happened is a tiefling by the name of Malik Jekt. There's plenty of references in everything I do, so if you catch that one, good on you. Essentially decided the only way to stop this war was to end it once and for all with a force that would be able to win it. Potentially for the tieflings, kind of just for himself. I imagine he saw himself as a bit of a do-gooder. He thought he was doing the right thing, but ultimately a little naive with the magics that he messed with to make this happen. How he made this happen was by opening a portal to the demon realm, his intentions being that he would bring through enough demons to focus the fighting on them and essentially force the others to or the other people involved in this war to band together if they were to stop this force. All of that worked absolutely perfectly. Unfortunately, he released way too many demons into this world, and as we found out much later on in Campaign 1 that I ran with the first group, he ultimately became a slave to it, his kind of blood and his body being used to keep this portal open and allowing wave after wave of demon to enter this realm with no kind of stop in sight for that. As a result, as I say, the humans to the south and all the other races mixed amongst them, and the dwarves to the north and all the other races mixed amongst them, bound together? No. Yes, bound together, and essentially beat back this demon force. They didn't know its origin, and as a result, after years and years of campaigning to wipe out demons wherever they came across, them, the demon presence came to such a small amount that only the most clever, insidious, and manipulative demons lay in remaining in the continent as it is now. So if you were to come across a demon who is simply there and kind of dumb, doesn't have much of a plan, chances are that demon probably came over through the open portal still. The rest of them, you wouldn't even know. You could be best friends with one and have no idea because of the shape-changing magics that they've employed and all the rest of it. So getting on to after that, and what set up Campaign 1, is that as a result of the acts of Malik Jekt, it was decided that teleportation, because that was the magic that was used to bring the demons into this realm, was permanently banned. No magics employing any sort of teleportation whatsoever, Misty Step, Dimension Door, all that sort of thing, were ever allowed to be used again, and if somebody witnessed you using such magics, it would be imprisonment for, depending on who imprisoned you, for as long as anyone knows. And this has happened from time to time. However, in the first campaign, the group were immediately met by a character called Dasamar, who was the leader of a group called Viorum, and he clearly used teleportation magic to transport them from their home location to a ship on the seas around Bela'Dun, where he then charged them with a quick sort of test quest before they then went to Viorum Isle, the home of Viorum's main base, I guess, and that's located here, where the ping is in the top left. Port UV just working as a dock for getting people to Viorum and a bit of a trading place as well. One thing to note about being at sea on Bela'Dun is that the waters are so treacherous outside of Bela'Dun, the further out you go, the more likely you are to shipwreck, that no voyage that has been sent out that far has ever returned. And as a result, the general feel around Bela'Dun is like Americans. Bela'Dun is all there is in the world. There is no other place to go. This is the best place, and trying to go anywhere else is a waste of time. Sorry, Americans. From that point onwards, the group joined Viorum, who essentially worked as a mercenary group to go around and just make things better. Dasamar was a very altruistic person, he just wanted to help everyone, and the group eventually were involved in closing the demon portal that Malekject was still keeping open, much to the surprise of everyone who'd ever heard that that was still going on, because they thought they'd killed most of the demons, if not were working to kill the few remaining ones. And that's generally where that campaign ended, because of various reasons. Cut to, however, far forward, and we get to the campaign we're currently in. This story arc I have named. I don't know if I've named the whole campaign. No, I've just called them Campaign 1 and Campaign 2. But this story arc in specifically, is called Secrets of Arella. I have my own pantheon of gods, Arella being one of them. Probably should have got my DM screen, this bit of paper, out earlier so that I was prepared, but there we go. You'll know from watching any session ever that as soon as we start, Sevi reminds me of all the things I've forgotten, which is basically everything. So we have a mixture of gods. There are, I believe, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, yes. And we have our own calendar as well. I've put the calendar on screen in past sessions, but I will put it there again now for you guys to see. I don't think it gets much bigger when I zoom in. No, it doesn't. But yeah, that's how the calendar works. That's the days of the week. Only 6 days of the week. Only 300 days per year. And the months are named after the gods. The first month, I believe, yeah, the first month being named after the goddess of life, Arella, which is very relevant if you've watched any of Campaign 2. Although I've taken down all the Vods except for the most recent session. But if you watch the most recent session, you'll know that our cleric, played by my partner Sevi, Olivia, I think her name is. I mean, I should really know that, but yeah, Olivia Lightwood, she is a follower of Arella. So, we get on to Campaign 2, the campaign that we're currently in. And as I said, I wanted to recap the world lore. I don't know if I said that, but I put it in the title. I want to recap the world lore and the sessions that you guys won't have seen or won't get a chance to see because the VODs are mine and you can't have them. And I'll do that session by session. So, Session 1. And I'm not going to spend ages on each session, so don't worry, this isn't going to be a crazy long video. Session 1, I've named all the sessions. This one was called A Meeting in Morhen. For their own reasons, the group had essentially all been travelling to this kind of area, and I'll just ping that a couple times on the map for the stream. And they all had their own reasons for going that general direction, whether they were just randomly wandering and ended up there, or maybe they started there anyway. I'll go through the list as it appears to the right there. So Lael, he was part of a tribe, the Daliera tribe, which is pinged down here, but they're a wandering tribe and they wander the outskirts of the Wandering Wood. He found himself leaving his tribe for various reasons. I'm going to go through the sessions, but I won't go through the backstory of these characters because it will come through in future sessions as we stream them. So he found himself leaving the Daliera tribe for his own reasons and basically ending up at Morhen as he left. He kind of came out this way, skipped Broker's Ridge, and ended up at Morhen. In terms of how easy that would be to entirely miss a town or village that you'd think would be within view distance, roughly an inch on this map is a month's walk. So if you think that he came out of the journey about here, out of the woods about here, Broker's Ridge is a good sort of 3 weeks away. You ain't going to see that from where you are. And Morhen was about a month away. Also not visible, he just went. Olivia. Olivia is from the southern capital of Salvan, but she wanted to do good throughout the world, travel as a cleric with the ability to heal, and basically just followed the roads. She reached Aegis, which was currently on lockdown at the time, and had to travel around it. And she did so with a traveling merchant who she traded some coin for to simply take her wherever she might need to go. And eventually she ended up traveling up this road and getting to Morhen, and that's how she got there. Nemea, she was from Not, the town of Not, which is here, but was immediately cast out as a baby because Malik Jekt, a tiefling, was the one to bring demons into this realm. There is some racism towards tieflings, which is slowly filtering its way out over time, but there's still fanatics that are very much going to spit at their feet if they see a tiefling. There's those that just think they should be killed outright, and there's those that have no problem with them whatsoever and don't understand why you would apply such a widespread opinion on a group of people based on the acts of one person. But it's the world we live in and out of game. So she was cast out of Not, and as a result joined, I believe, her grandmother in a small group of outcasts. She was raised outside of Not, amidst these people, kind of tribal. They didn't really travel. And after they were attacked, she essentially fled, and happened to fled south, and it happened to be that if you go south from Not, you reach Morhen, and that's how she got there. Vice, he lives there, and had been living there for a while. Prior to that, he was travelling around just trying to make coin as either a chef or a lootist, though you'll never see it now, but one of the main elements of Session 1 is that he thinks the way to do a loot battle is to stab your opponent before you've even played a single note. It did not go well for him, but it was hilarious. So in the first session, they essentially meet up, and we did a bit of a cutback thing where they were all imprisoned and didn't know why, and then we cut back to a couple of days beforehand. Essentially, Goblins attacked Morhen, and it happened to coincide roughly with when the four of them showed up, not for any reason that they understood. Following the destruction of Vice's house, as the Goblins used it as a way into the city via tunnels that they had dug, the group were, what's the word? Brought in, for lack of the correct word, by the local guard around Morhen, and went into the tunnels to fight back the Goblins. In doing so, they were unfortunately caught in a cave-in as Vice's house did collapse, and the main person amidst the guard and the others that kind of knew about the four players' involvement all went down with them and had also either been crushed or killed. One member of the guard did manage to be brought free from the wreckage, but was now in a sort of comatose state. As they came out of the wreckage, or were rescued out of the wreckage because they were all unconscious, they woke up in prison, essentially with the accusation being these goblin attacks timed too perfectly with your appearance. What did you do? How were you involved? We know you must have been involved. And they then proceeded to break out of prison, try and leave a message with the leader of the guard, who is currently in a comatose state, just on a bit of paper in his boot, if I remember correctly, and then fled. That encompasses Session 2, full circle, and I believe then we get to Session 3, take the man out of Morhen. So the group quickly sided with a merchant who was nearby, and he essentially said for some coin he'd take them as far away from Morhen as they wanted to go. And they travelled with him until they got to Broker's Ridge, which is a location where various merchants have essentially banded together to have a home space away from any sort of bandit attacks. They've banded together so that they can't be attacked as easily, and they essentially trade goods amidst each other for free so that they can get the best prices, giving the magic items to the guy that's a specialist in magic items and has the correct contacts, giving the gems to somebody that knows a jeweler, and essentially they all get the same price, and they come back and they pull their resources, they pull some of their coin as a result. That didn't really properly go down until about Session 5, so there was an in-between session just travelling where the group had to overcome a bit of combat, and as 3 of our players are basically entirely new, I wanted to include a fair bit of combat as we get started so that they could feel what that was like and build upon it over time. So Session 4, the White Lady, saw some first initial appearances from Arella, and specifically into contacting Olivia, a disciple of Arella. And Session 5 moved on to Trouble at the Ridge, where they agreed with one of the merchants Well, the merchants told a tale of some plight that they were currently going through. It involved one of the merchants having come across some orbs that seemed to contain some kind of magic. They were inert, but seemingly still had some power about them in this strange opposite way that doesn't really make sense. And what they were asked to do was to essentially allow this merchant who was out in the field somewhere to use one of these orbs, the second of three that he had found, to teleport back to Broker's Ridge, knowing full well that something was chasing him for these orbs. And considering he'd still have one left, he was fairly confident that when he did get back, this being would find him. So the group agreed. This merchant used one of the orbs to teleport back to Broker's Ridge. And shortly afterwards, a couple days later, a demonic figure did indeed track him down, and the group fought that figure and managed to defeat him. I believe the third orb got used in the fight as well, so they never really found out what those massively did. But that encompassed the sixth session, the Trader's Trial, and they left on good terms with the merchants and carried on their journey. One of the merchants gave Olivia a scrap of paper that spoke of a prophecy that was mentioned earlier, and I will just go to that now. That's the wrong place. So this scrap of paper here that talks of a prophecy to do with, well, I'll read it. When the Keeper, the Follower, the Veiled, the Wanderer, and the Chosen unite, they will hold all they need to join the gods. And it was explained at the time that that was from a book called Divine Cognition and the White Lady, which is a reference to Arella. Olivia believes that she could find the second half of this page because she knows of a library in Stalvin that houses a plethora of unique and mainstream as well books on all sorts of topics, magic included, the gods included, and all sorts, but that it's not easy to get into, that you would need, well, generally it's you would be able to visit it with supervision and restriction, but that may not be the case by the time they get there. So they agreed the best thing to do was to travel to Stalvin. With no horses or cart or probably not much supplies, because they weren't really thinking that one through, they decided to just head out on the road and worked it out to be roughly a 6 or 7 month journey. However, they stopped on that road pretty often, as is the nature of D&D. We got to Session 7, The Fallen Witness, and I don't remember exactly what happened. Let me just have a look. Oh yeah, so on the road they came across signposts that basically spoke of a location which would serve as a trial. That reward would be offered on the other side, but that danger was definitely to be involved. And the group decided to head in anyway and essentially seek out that reward. And they did so. They managed to get through a kind of small chamber that held escape room style puzzles and make it out to the other side, where they were then trialed by a ancient elven character that seemed to be bound there by magic in some fashion. Having defeated him, he offered them a gift, and Nemea was met by her patron, the Fallen Exile. Vice and Lael were essentially just given the physical rewards that were there, but it became apparent that Vice seems to be carrying some sort of green stone with the symbol of Arella in it, which looks like this. And Olivia was met by Arella, or was given the opportunity to witness her god in a form that she could comprehend. And the group moved on. Next session was called Divine Recognition, and that would essentially encompass the meeting of the patrons, the gods, and the various items that they got. Session 9, Windswept Whispers, saw the group pass a place called Bermit. Bermit was a town where one of the original characters from Campaign 1 started in and was born. Much like A Quiet Place or Birdcage, I think is the other one, film on Netflix, not bad. Quiet Place is better. There were these swarming creatures called the Vespen that essentially attacked anything that made a sound. Bermit had been destroyed by these creatures, people had been killed, structures had been torn apart, and they'd found that if they start a big fire, they could cause a lot of the Vespen to fly into it because they just heard the sound, and it was too late before they burned up to feel the heat. Unfortunately, they eventually wised up to that and stopped going towards the heat, and were a little bit cautious. And the few people surrounding Bermit, or inside Bermit, that had survived so far, sought the help of the group to essentially stop what was ever causing this, and the group was successful in doing so. I believe some sort of structure or cave-in had opened up to let them through, and they used a earthquake spell, much higher level than any of them were able to cast, and in doing so, one of the players, I can't remember who it was, it might have been Vice, suffered quite a lot of exhaustion, almost killing himself simply casting this, I believe, 8th level spell, when his capacity at the time was, I think, 2nd level spells. But it caused enough of an earthquake to contain the rest of these creatures and allow Bermit to rebuild. We then get to session 10, and there's 20 before we started streaming again, but the next ones are all in a place called Aegis, so I'll be skipping through a few of them. Session 10, the Southern Shield. The group came to Aegis, which is just here. Now, I mentioned a while ago, before campaign 1, there were the wars predominantly between Stalvin and Dunbarlin. One of the locations that Stalvin set up to aid them in this war was to build Aegis, a small military outpost on the main road, so that if any sort of opposition was seen travelling the main road, because leaving the main road in Bela'Dun is a good way to get eaten, and just generally killed. Might not be eaten that does it. And over time, this military outpost developed into a small village. People, the families of the military people stationed there, took up residence, and eventually the whole place built out and out and out until it was a town in its own right and had various amenities. And it still generally serves to warn Stalvin of anything heading in that direction along the main road, but that function is needed less and less over time. The war's gone. Peace treaties were brokered at the time to fight back the demons, and those treaties, whilst thin, still currently are in place in today's time. Also, I should mention that Campaign 2 takes place 5 years after Campaign 1, so the acts of Campaign 1 have died down a fair amount, but it's still mentioned the various triumphs of these old players, these old heroes that are known throughout the realm, possibly not exactly by name, but definitely some people know the name. For example, there's a statue in Bermit of Nami, one of the old players' characters, and this group don't really know why that's there, except for Sevi, because she was in both campaigns, but it was actually built by the old players to honour Nami, who died at the end of the campaign. Getting back to our current time, the group entered Aegis. It's a military town still, but there are two factions warring at each other that have nothing to do with the military, the Shinra and the Mako, which moves us on to Session 11, Allies at Aegis. The group were met by the Shinra and the Mako leader and essentially asked to carry out a job for them. They decided to side with the Mako and pretty much moved on to Session 12, down the rabbit hole. They decided to do a job for the Mako that consisted of attacking a Stalvin convoy to steal the weapons on board and essentially then provide those weapons to the Mako. They dressed up this task as though they wanted to be able to defend themselves from the guard a bit, but specifically from the Shinra, who they are in constant competition with. However, as time went on, it became clear that perhaps they weren't being told the whole story, and in Session 13, more to the Mako, they were asked by the Shinra leader to look into the Mako and see what they could find out about them, because maybe they've done some things that lead them to not really be that trustworthy, that maybe they should change allegiance and in fact go against the Mako. They looked into it and they found that there were indeed some things that the Mako were guilty of, but they thought that probably the Shinra are too, and they decided to essentially out all of them, and Lael became very adamant that the best way to deal with this infighting in Aegis was to announce to the entire town what was going on, who the Mako are, who their people are, where they live, what they've been doing, who the Shinra are, what they've been up to, and neatly omit what they'd done for the Mako in stealing from the guards. This didn't go down well, as you can expect, and short of being assassinated, the group was scrambled, several of them were imprisoned, and they essentially had to break free from a prison that they then got brought into. Two of the party didn't get captured, and then used disguises and magic to get into the prison and what's the word? Present themselves as guards so that they could help break out their two friends. However, to break out their two friends and not just basically get every other prisoner down in that prison shouting, "Hey, there's a fucking break-in," they had to free everyone. And they didn't ask what the rest of those people were in Aegis for, or in the jails of Aegis for. So not really sure the type of person they released. That encompassed Session 14, Rifts and Gifts. Then we had Session 15, Behind Open Doors, where they finally escaped. Session 16, the 5th faction, saw the group essentially serve as the 5th faction themselves, where you then had the Stalva military, the Mako, the Shinra, all the civilians of Aegis not looking to get involved, and then our group that are looking to essentially fuck up everything and kind of try and make it better but not do great at it, and still kind of leave on good terms in some instances, which they did. They then headed out, and we got to Session 17, What Dwells Beneath. As the group left Aegis, back on their journey once more, they were having to spend more and more time gathering berries and hunting for food because they didn't have that many ration packs, unless you're Olivia, who's counting their ration packs correctly and always had spares. The group came across a stop in the road. A tree had been knocked over, and they went to inspect it, Lael did I believe, and fell through the floor where it had become weak. Nemea chose to jump down with him. That may have been in reverse. I think Nemea went down and Lael followed her rather. This is more difficult than it looks apparently. Following their landing in the cavern they'd entered below that, there was a cave-in, and no one else was able to enter through that entrance. Fortunately, Vice and Livia found another entrance, which saw them enter at basically the exact opposite end of these caverns. The whole place was unstable. They damaged a lot of their weapons and armor fighting the various oozes that were taking up place inside this large dungeon. It became apparent that an old group down there was worshipping these slimes for some reason, and Vice got himself some fancy slime heart armor, having killed one of the largest oozes down there, a black pudding, if you know your creatures in 5e. And they then found that the exit had also caved in whilst they'd been down there, and instead had to travel for quite a long time up a river, which they assumed came to an open section of water at some point. Fortunately it did, and we get to Session 18, the Folly of Dwarfs. Note that was when they left still, so skipping past that. Session 19, Shadows of Serenity. So they exited the dungeon with the various oozes, found themselves in a forest away from the main road where the tree was, and unsure as the correct direction to get back to the main road and travel on to Starven. At this point they had actually bought a cart leaving Aegis so that they could travel a little bit faster, and they bought a horse to pull it, a horse called Adana, which was one of the horses given to one of the old players in Campaign 1, which got left in the field when all of the people in Campaign 1 were teleported to safety, those that survived, and Adana went missing from that point onwards. The owner of Adana, who I believe was Luminara, Sevi's character in Campaign 1, I think that was her name, never saw her horse again as far as she was concerned, at least not for the next 5 years. And then Adana showed up outside of Aegis and was purchased by the new group. Nobody knows at this point how Adana got from where she was left to Aegis, but this party didn't know the horse prior to buying it, so they wouldn't really care. So obviously this current party, the new party, wanted to get back to their cart and horse and carry on their journey, but without knowing where the road is, they were unable to do so. They had, however, come upon a monastery with a monk standing up front called Shan. And if I ever put the Vods back up, you'll know that I can barely pronounce that name. He had blood on his hands, though it didn't seem to be sure as to why, and the group agreed to essentially carry out a task for him where he was trying to carry out a ritual which would destroy a relic which was important to him for some reason. We then get to Session 20, the Burden of Brethren. In order to carry out this ritual, Shan had to travel to a nearby hilltop, accompanied by the group, and infuse his key on this stone box, small handheld box. He did so, and he then tested whether or not the ritual was successful by opening it. Unfortunately, opening it produced the same effect as it would have done if the ritual had not been taking place, which was a purpley dark smoke came out and killed everyone around. Fortunately, the ritual nullified the killing everyone around part and instead sucked them into the relic itself, and the four in the party and Shan, were brought into the relic. They were immediately set upon by small demons in a strange cavernous realm, and they had to fight them all back, which they did so successfully, opening a portal to the next realm. In this second section of the relic, they found themselves surrounded by undead monks that looked particularly similar to Shan, and it became apparent at this point through Shan's explanation that his monastery was being attacked by creatures from the wilds of Bela'Dun, that they had managed to fight them back successfully a number of times, but they had lost the occasional brother in doing so. And the monastery had decided to use the relic against these attacking creatures. However, the monastery was created to protect this relic and stop it from ever being used, ever being given to the wrong hands. Shan thought it wrong and against the tenets of his monastery to use the relic regardless of the situation, and ended up taking it for himself so that he could make sure it was never used, and grabbing the books at the time to carry out the ritual that taught him how to do the ritual, though not in great detail. He actually ended up using the relic against his own brothers to stop them taking it from him and using it against these other creatures, and perhaps then more and more and more, he didn't know. Unfortunately, this meant that those that weren't beaten in the normal part of the fight and then fled, or killed by the relic being opened, it meant that he was left by himself, hand covered in blood. It then became apparent that the monks he had killed by opening the relic had also somewhat been sucked inside, and were now on this plane undead, looking to enact their vengeance. That was kind of them that started it. The group successfully killed all of them, or put them back to rest. A portal opened and they moved through to the third section of the relic, the last section. There they were met by a demon who was very large, called Caraxis, who decided that he was going to pick one of the five to inhabit, and that they had served him well by entering the relic and giving him the opportunity to finally free the bonds of being inside this relic by using one of them as a host. He was very almost successful, and Vice was almost became a thrall for this demon. Fortunately, Nemea used some pretty clever magic to stop possession of Vice being possible for a short period. Caraxis then turned his gaze over to Nemea and began trying to kill her to cancel the spell, and then return to Vice. But unfortunately was taken down before he was able to. I say unfortunately. I liked him. The group were then expelled from the relic, and it became entirely inert. Opening it, you've got two sides of a box. Shan thanked them for the help and sent them back to the road. And we then get to session 21, Dawn and Downwarden, which is available on Twitch. Will be available on my YouTube. I'm Kovu Rain on everything that I've made recently, because I changed everything to that name. If you're not following, I think it's following. If you're not following the Twitch, please do. If it's your kind of thing, we play every Tuesday when we can, because we're not playing yesterday. But we are playing next week. See you all then. I hope you've enjoyed the recap. Bye, stream.